In a recent IFL TV interview, Eddie Hearn said that he had muted Chris Eubank Sr. on Twitter. And if you look at this tweet on screen from Eubank Sr., I guess this is one of the reasons why. He tweeted this just the other day. Eubank Sr. said, "Sky was big and it soon will be back to small. I launched it and I'm the reason Edward has his job. At Anthony Joshua and Boxers, hashtag research the truth at ITV." Funny stuff, at least to me. As much as I do criticize the Eubanks for trying to sell mutton dressed as lamb with regards to this IBO quote-unquote world title fight against Reynold Quinlan, I also like the fact that there are a pair of boxers in the Eubanks challenging the boxing establishment, challenging the promoters out there. I do like that. But the fight itself, putting that type of fight on pay-per-view and calling it a world title, I have to criticize that. But the likes of Eddie Hearn, the likes of Frank Warren, they need to be challenged by boxers. I like the idea of boxers being empowered enough to be able to do deals directly with television companies and cut out the middleman, which is the promoter. In the long term, I'd like to see more of it. I'd like to see more fighters be able to go to television companies and do their own deals and put on their own shows. That means the fighter makes more money. And the middleman, the promoter, has to take a back seat and do something else. You know, eventually, if there were no promoters and if fighters were in charge of everything themselves, some people think it'll be bad. Other people think it'll be good. I personally think it'll be good because here's the argument against. People say that if a fighter is in control of the whole thing and he doesn't have a promoter telling him what to do, then he's going to always choose the path of least resistance. I disagree, because at the end of the day, if there's lots of fighters doing deals with television companies, the television companies are going to be a lot more discerning in terms of which fights they accept from these fighters. At the moment, the television companies, yes, they do have some level of input, but a lot of the time they leave it down to the promoter to sort out who's going to be fighting who. And they just kind of give final approval most of the time. I know they can be a bit more hands-on sometimes, but most of the time they leave it to the promoter. Certainly with regards to Eddie Hearn. They have a lot of faith and trust in Eddie Hearn. But if it was a case of the Eubanks going to a television company, then loads of other different British fighters going to TV companies and doing deals, maybe they wouldn't be doing long-term deals. Maybe they'd be doing deals for specific pay-per-views. The television company is in a position where they can take it or leave it. They'll say, okay, we like this fight is decent, we'll accept it. Or they could turn around and say, no, this fight is not competitive, we're not accepting it. Now, the Eubank-Quinlan fight is not a good example. It's certainly not setting things off to a good start with regards to fighters doing direct deals with television companies. But there've been other fighters in the past. For example, David Haye, when he fought Audley Harrison, that was David Haye doing a deal directly with Sky. That wasn't exactly a great fight, was it? But at the same time, you look at Vladimir Klitschko. Well, both Klitschko brothers, Vladimir and Vitaly. They've been putting on their own shows in Germany for years. K2 Promotions, that's the Klitschko promotion company. So they've been putting on their own shows. They've been doing their own deals with, I believe it's RTL in Germany. And that's gone very successfully. There have been very good fights on Klitschko shows. And I know the Klitschko era wasn't the strongest in terms of competition, but between Vitaly and Vladimir, they did, between them, fight some decent fighters, or at least fight the best fighters who are around during their era at the time. And they did it on their own shows. At the end of the day, if you're a champion, you hold belts. there's going to be pressure from your sanctioning body. And that's what the Klitschko's had. Even though they're putting on their own shows, they weren't just totally picking whoever they wanted every time, because the sanctioning bodies were putting at least some type of pressure on them to fight certain people. And Vitaly was more than happy to fight his mandatories and so on and so forth. Vladimir was too, but I do feel as though he put certain fights off for as long as he could, whereas Vitaly was more game for getting the fights on right now. But I'm digressing. Back to this Eubank senior tweet. He's saying that Sky will soon be back to small. He's saying he launched Sky and he's the reason that Edward, it's pretty funny, he uses the word Edward. He's clearly trying to belittle him, undermine him and what have you, talk down to him. He says he's the reason that Edward has his job. He's at least part of the reason. I think it would be inaccurate and unfair to play down how big Eubank Sr. was during his heyday. He was an extremely popular fighter in the UK. He was a household name. And that's not to say everybody liked him. They didn't. There was a hell of a lot of people that hated him. But he was popular in the sense that his viewing figures were terrific. And he was, as products go, I know he's called his son a product recently, as products go, his market value was very high in the United Kingdom during his heyday. So in terms of him saying that he launched Sky and this, that, and the other, he helped Sky and whatnot, he was one of the guys. There was a whole heap of different fighters that were fighting on Sky. Lennox Lewis. And Sky got a lot of the rights to international fights as well. So, you know, I don't think it was all down to Eubank. And as far as being the reason that Edward has his job today, Eddie Hearn, there's some truth to that as well. There's probably more truth to that than there is of Eubank insinuating that he launched Sky or launched Sky into the world of boxing. That's what he seems to be insinuating there. Because a very large part of Mr. Hearn, and I'm talking about his dad, Barry Hearn's success in the world of boxing, was down to Chris Eubank Sr. When you think of Barry Hearn during the 90s, you think of Eubank with him, walking to the ring with him, which is something that, well, some promoters do it. Eddie Hearn, I think, has done it a few times, but Barry Hearn, you'd see a lot of the time walking to the ring with a big grin on his face with Chris Eubank Sr. when he was fighting. So you really do associate those two with each other. And Barry Hearn has always said that he's an accountant. You know, everybody knows he's a chartered accountant. And he's a numbers man. He's a figures man. And if the numbers and figures don't make sense, then he's moving on to something else. And that's what he did. Barry Hearn abandoned boxing because he didn't see that it was financially viable anymore. So he moved on and did other things with his business, the darts and the snooker and all that other stuff. Who's to say that if Eubank hadn't come along and signed with him, that he wouldn't have abandoned boxing a lot earlier? Maybe he would have done. So perhaps Eubank Sr. is correct with what he's saying here in terms of he's the reason that Eddie Hearn has his job. Because his dad's success, we know, is a very, very big reason, a very big contributing factor to why Eddie Hearn is in the position he's in now in the world of boxing. And if it wasn't for Eubank Sr. putting his dad in a certain position, then yeah, what Eubank Sr. is saying may well be true. I'll be very interested to see how successful or unsuccessful this pay-per-view is going to be. I hope that in future, you know, we may have to give the Eubanks the benefit of the doubt. Some of you might not like hearing that, but with regards to this Renault Quinlan fight, I don't like the fight. I don't think the fight is pay-per-view worthy. But should we assume that Eubank is going to be trying to fight the likes of a Quinlan on ITV on pay-per-view ongoing? Is that what we should assume? Or maybe we should look at it this way. Maybe we should think, okay, the Eubanks are trying to branch out on their own. They're doing their own deal with ITV. Right now, because it's in the embryonic stages, this relationship between themselves and ITV, this latest relationship, they probably don't have the money to secure a Golovkin or what have you. But if this Quinlan fight is successful, maybe ITV will be willing to put more money up, and therefore the Eubanks will be able to secure big names, proper opponents. Maybe they'll be willing to do that in the future, and we'll see those kind of fights on ITV. James DeGale, by the way, has ruled himself out of fighting Chris Eubank Jr. He said the IBO title was not legitimate, and if you go to, I mentioned this before, the websites of all the major sanctioning bodies, they recognize the other major sanctioning bodies, but they do not recognize the IBO. And James DeGale said, for that reason, I've got no interest in fighting Chris Eubank Jr. because this IBO title that he's fighting for against Reynold Quillen is in James DeGale's division, the super middleweight division. James DeGale says, I don't want no IBO belt. That's not a real belt. So he's ruled himself out. But as far as the other guys out there, we don't know if James DeGale's going to beat Badou Jack. He may not. We'll have to find out. George Groves, maybe that's a possibility for Eubank Jr. Maybe they will actually choose legit fights once they get past this first event, this first pay-per-view event. If it's a success, maybe they actually will go for legit fights, or maybe they won't. Maybe they're hoping to milk the public with substandard fights, mutton dressed as lamb in the long term. Time will tell. You drop your comments in the comment section below. Let me know how you feel about this whole situation. Eubank Sr.'s tweets. Do you follow him on Twitter? Do you find his trolling funny or not? Me, I am kind of... I do kind of have a soft spot for this type of... or these type of theatrics. Particularly when you're dealing with these money men in boxing, these big, powerful promoters. I do enjoy seeing somebody like a Eubank, an actual fighter, tease them a little bit and get under their skin. I do find it funny. And I know there's back and forth between Warren and the Eubanks and Hearn and the Eubanks and even Hearn and Warren. And I think that kind of conflict between these different promotional entities now is actually good for boxing in terms of, you know, drumming up publicity for boxing. As long as they're not going to refuse to work together, as long as they see business sense. And by the way, Eddie Hearn has been very spiteful in a recent interview towards Eubank Sr. It's the first time I've ever seen Eddie Hearn be that spiteful and say such spiteful things. I hope he's not burning bridges with Eubank. I hope that him and the Eubanks can actually do business in the future if the Eubanks are successful when it comes to ITV. Because one thing we don't want is any type of Cold War like we had during the Mayweather era with Golden Boy and Bob Arum. We don't want any type of Cold War going on in the UK. Relations have been a bit frosty between Matchroom and Frank Warren over the years, but they've still been doing business. They still have had their fighters fight each other. And so I hope it's the same. If the Eubanks build up a stable, I hope their fighters, including Eubank Jr., can actually fight Warren fighters or Eddie Hearn fighters, so on and so forth. You know, as long as they still do business, then all this back and forth on Twitter and social media and in the press and on television and whatnot, I think is good. And I like it. I find it entertaining. It's WWE style stuff with Eubank Sr. playing kind of a pantomime villain, a wrestling heel. I find it entertaining. So anyway, drop your comments in the comment section below. Let me know how you feel. It's your boy Hatman. I'm out.